Started. Thanks again, everyone, for showing up this evening. Last one of the year. It's working out about right. Getting more daylight now and warmer, so we'll want to be spending more time outside, I'm sure. All right, so today we are looking at identification of seedlings, which it turns out, is I think probably a pretty important skill if you want to check on your plantings, especially. As a plant community ecologist, when I do plant surveys and inventories, I don't pay too much attention to seedlings most of the time because technically speaking, they're not yet established. But when you want to evaluate a seeding that you've done and get some idea of what's coming up and how successful it is, this is going to be a big help, hopefully, to you. So the seedling ID comes down to, I think, a lot of just really two things. As the plants begin to look like the adult version of what they're going to be, that's pretty much what you have to have. You have to have at least a little bit of that going on. Some of them will look very similar. Their leaf structure will look pretty similar to what they're going to end up being. And then, so that's one group. And then there's another group of seedlings that look fairly different than what they're going to be. Their leaves are not the same as what they're going to be as they get bigger. When it comes down, I think, to seedling ID, you're definitely going to want to have one of these guides. There are 3 seedling ID guides out there that are available for the Midwest. You see all 3 of them here lined up. The first one there, the Prairie Seedling and Seeding Evaluation Guide. That one was put together by, well, I think it was basically a consulting project. It was funded a lot by Iowa Department of Transportation and Living Roadway Trust. There were some other supporters. Pheasants Forever was a supporter of that project, and Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. It was basically done by a team of ecologists and biologists that work up in Minnesota. They used to be called Benestru. It's an environmental engineering firm, and now they were bought out by Stantec. So it was those folks put it together. Paul Bockenstedt, maybe some of you know Paul. He was in Iowa at one time. He got his master's degree at UNI. He was I think the chief project manager on that. And so the Prairie Seedling and Seeding Evaluation Guide is one option. You can download that for free from the Living Roadway Trust Fund as a PDF. It has not just seedling ID, but it also has a portion of the book is dedicated to helping you do an assessment of your planting. So doing that evaluation part that you see there. They include 53 native species, 11 grasses, and 42 forbs. This is the only one of the 3 that also has seedlings of non-native weedy species. They include some of those so that you can get, of course, have some help recognizing those. Invariably, there will be some of those coming up in a planting. So being able to distinguish what's native and what's non-native is another important skill there. You got 26 non-native species, 8 grasses, and 18 forbs. The one in the middle is done by the USDA NRCS. That guide is also available online from the USDA NRCS website. You can download a PDF of it. It has 40 native species in it, 5 grasses, and 35 forbs. It includes quite a few forb species that I would say are sort of marginal, as well, at least native prairie plants for Iowa. And even prairie plants, really, in some cases. They include royal catchfly, which is a species that its main range is down in southern Missouri. It might occur on some prairies in a few places. We don't have it here in Iowa. They also include slender lespedeza, which is another one that's more of a woodland species. It's just in the southern part of Iowa. They include purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, which again is more of a woodland savanna species. But And then the third one, which I would say probably is the best one of the three, you'd have to purchase it because it's not available for free anywhere, but the Tallgrass Prairie Center Guide, you see on the very right there, that was a project, again, done by the Tallgrass Prairie Center, of course, and it was headed up by Dave Williams. He's the author there. And with some illustrations by Brent Butler. This was a lot of work. Of course, all of these are a lot of work because in order to get pictures of seedlings, you have to grow them up, of course, and have a greenhouse. And it's not easy getting pictures of seedlings. It may seem like it would be, but it's really not that easy. I have a few pictures of seedlings in this presentation tonight that I took for this presentation. Was growing some seedlings in a greenhouse at Drake, and got just maybe about a dozen or so. The Tallgrass Prairie Center has the most coverage. It's got 72 native species in it, 14 grasses, so it has the best coverage on grasses, and it has 58 forbs. So more forbs than any of the other ones as well. All right, so there's your options. By the way, the Prairie Seedling and Seeding Evaluation Guide, it also has another cover that looks like this. So it's a little bit different than that one you see there, but this is the same thing. Maybe it's a later edition. So when we think about seedlings, I want to just say a little bit about seed germination biology, the process of seed germination. This is, of course, what's happening as you put the seeds out there and then you wait for nature to take over and the magic to occur of a plant shoot developing from the seed. There are some steps right there that have to occur, of course, for that to happen. And the first one is the dormancy has to be removed. So nearly all seeds in the temperate region in our area here are formed with innate dormancy, so that when they are released from the plant, when they're dispersed, which is usually sometime during the summer or into the fall, that they won't try to grow. It's not a good time to grow until, of course, winter passes and the next growing season comes along. So dormancy is just a way to enforce that, to help the plant have a better success with that seed by forcing it to wait until spring comes. Dormancy is usually removed in, well, it can be removed in a number of different ways, but the most common way would be stratification, which is just exposure to very cold, damp conditions, which is what a seed will experience, of course, if it's laying out there in the ground over the winter. Then, once dormancy is removed, stratification occurs. Now there's nothing to stop the seed from germinating per se, but that doesn't mean it's going to germinate. It's going to also require some germination cues. So the nature of the environment at the moment where the seed is located. Generally, the things that are important there are how much water there is, how much oxygen there is, what the temperature of the soil is, and how much light the seed perceives. And the seed can perceive light to some extent because of the phytochrome system that plants use. Then if everything is good, basically if it passes the test for germination cues, then germination can proceed. And the first step is imbibition there, which is basically just the absorption of water from the seed, from the environment. That has to start, it has to be absorbed through the seed coat. And that's really what starts the process. That sort of swells the seed up a little bit. And that water is important in triggering the next step there, number 4, which is to activate enzymes. And those enzymes start breaking down food storage products, start digesting that to produce nutrients. That's basically what respiration is. Nutrients and energy. Those two things are translocated to different parts of the seed and then assimilated into the growing points of the embryo. The embryo is the baby plant, and that assimilation of nutrients and energy then allows for growth to take place. So when you look at a seed, you might, and sometimes I make this slip, I say that the seed is the baby plant. Seed's not really the baby plant. The embryo is the baby plant. That's the young plant that's formed again from fertilization when a sperm fertilizes an egg. The seed is just, the embryo is packaged inside a seed. So it's, again, it contains that young baby plant, but the seed itself includes some other things as well. This little diagram here is, there's two types of seed here shown. So the one on the left is a bean seed, which kind of represents the eudicots. And then the one over here on the right is a corn, which of course would represent the monocots. So a plumule, you can see a plumule in both of these. The plumule is basically the young portion of the developing shoot system of the plant that occurs above the cotyledons. And then the grasses have a coleoptile. The coleoptile is basically a sheath, a protective structure that sits over top of that plumule and the apical meristems to protect it as it's pushing its way up through the soil. The epicotyl is the portion of the embryo that is basically the upper part of the stem. It's basically the portion of the axis that occurs between the cotyledons and the first true emerging leaves, which we can see in this diagram right here. The hypocotyl is the lower part of the stem, so it's basically underneath the cotyledons. It's between the cotyledons and the radicle. And the radicle is the embryonic root. That tissue would form the root. Same thing down here. And then again, in the grasses, there's a coleorhiza, which is again the same thing as a coleoptile. It's a sheath protective structure that protects the root, the growing root. Of course, some plants have two cotyledons, dicots or eudicots, and some have one cotyledon. That's the monocots. The cotyledon is a seed leaf. Basically, it's an embryonic seed leaf. In monocots, over here in this corn, it's the scutellum. Scutellum is another term for that. It's the single cotyledon of a grass embryo that's specialized for absorption of food from the endosperm. So the scutellum over here is involved in absorbing the food that's in this endosperm here. The endosperm is not a part of the embryo. The endosperm is a part of the seed, but not the embryo. It forms from what's called double fertilization. The sperm unites with a couple of nuclei in the central cell of the embryo sac and forms this food. Basically, that's what the endosperm is. It's food storage. We don't see an endosperm over here, and that's because the other function of a cotyledon in many of the dicots is food storage. It's the main structure for food storage that's again going to feed the young plant as it begins to grow. Obviously, it's very important for a seedling that's germinating to have food storage, because it has to be able to grow somehow to start developing the shoot system. And it's not going to be until it gets to this stage, of course, over here, when it has some actual true leaves, that photosynthesis can occur and it can start to feed itself. So all of this stuff in here has to be done from the storage that it has. Okay, let's take a look at these three guides. Oops, so the embryos are the blue areas here. Let's take a look at these three guides. I just want to give you a sense of what you can see in these. So again, this is that first one, the one that was published by the DOT, Ivy Living Roadways Trust Fund. And most of the photos that are in this seedling ID guide were done by this gentleman here, Larry Gilds. The DNR cooperated in this, and they grew the seedlings, and they have a prison facility somewhere. I think it's over by Newton, but anyway, a prison facility somewhere where there's a greenhouse, and so that's where he worked, and he was the person that did most of the photography here. So you can kind of see what it looks like. They have a picture of the seedling, they have a picture of the seeds, they have some description. Mark Mueller has a picture of what the adult plant looks like. They talk a little bit about confusing lookalike species, which is always helpful in a field guide or some kind of guide to help you identify things, so you are aware of what things you might be confusing it with. This is the other one from the USDA NRCS. It too has pictures of seedlings. This one actually has pictures of seedlings at a couple of different stages. So they have a picture of a seedling when it's really just coming up, and then another picture a little bit later on, which is helpful, because again, there can be quite a few changes that occur between those two stages. And again, they point out some distinguishing characteristics. It looks like here they're talking more about the adult plants, but then the one from Tallgrass Prairie Center looks like this. And all, by the way, all of these are looking at the same two species here. Oxeye or Heliopsis, Helianthroides, and Echinacea pallida. So you can kind of compare again which one you think will work the best. The thing that's nice about the Tallgrass Prairie Center one that Dave Williams did is that there's good pictures, and that's always important. And I think these pictures are pretty good here too. The PDF that you download looks like it may not be quite as good quality as if you could have the real thing in front of you, but these are pretty good pictures. And then Dave lists quite a few things. You can see he has these little triangles or little arrows that point to different things. So he's trying to, again, point out things that are very useful, at least he thinks, so he's found to be very useful in determining what the species is. And he's got a little bit here about lookalikes as well. And some of them have some pictures of seeds, not all of them, but some of them do. We're going to be using pictures from this. I scanned a lot of pictures from this book to put into the PowerPoint tonight. And we'll also be having some pictures from this one too. I did not scan from the book because they wouldn't have been very good quality. I was able to contact a DNR and had Bill Johnson send me the actual images that Larry took for this project. I won't be including anything from this guide. And there'll be some pictures that I took myself. But I first want to start out just by talking about these pictures here, which I took quite a while back out at John Judson's Diversity Farms, and he grows a lot of seedlings, of course, to produce plants for people to buy. And this is the point here is that, let me put the names up there. The point here is that if you are looking at seedlings very early in their growth, you're not going to be able to identify them very well at all. Now, this group right here, I can kind of tell that this is Monarda fistulosa. The leaves are starting to look a little bit like Monarda leaves, and you might be able to even get a little bit of a Monarda scent from these, perhaps. I'm not sure about that. But when you look at these other ones, especially these two over here, what we're looking at basically are just cotyledons. And there really is no hope in identifying, at least in my mind, unless you can use pictures like this. But even in these pictures, these young seedlings look very much alike. Now, this one here, Dromocalis arguta, which is prairie cinquefoil, is starting to develop another true seed leaf. So these are the cotyledons down here, and then there's some seed leaves here. True seed leaves, excuse me, true leaves, not seed leaves, true leaves. And so when you start getting those, that's what you have to have, of course, in order to have some chance at determining what you've got. Here's just another example of 4 more species that, again, at this stage, is just not going to be possible, really, to know what you've got. They all look the same. And it's going to be pretty much the same, as you might suspect, with very early growth of grasses and sedges too. That's what we have here. So at this stage, and when I see these out in floristic inventories and stuff, I just call them grass seedling or forb seedling. That's the best you can do. All right, let's take a look at some examples here. So the first one here is prairie phlox. So in some of these like this, what I'm going to do here, and what you can use this presentation, this PDF I sent you for a guide, I guess, if you will. Here's this picture over here. The ones with the white background, and it's sort of white stippling background, again, are the ones that were done and paid for by the Iowa DOT, the Living Roadway Trust Fund. These are the ones that Larry Guild took, these pictures. And then this one, of course, this is the one from Tallgrass Prairie Center. It's always got a black background, and often there's 2 or 3 pictures like this stacked up. And then what I also did, because essentially what you're doing when you're trying to identify seedlings is you're trying to see how well it looks like, or what you can see that looks like the adult plant. So all of these are going to have pictures of the adult plant am primarily focusing on the stem and leaves, because it's the stem and the leaves. That's all you've got to work with over here on these seedlings, just stem and leaves. And again, at some point, these seedlings start to look more and more like the adult plant. In some cases, there's, I think, there's ability to develop sort of a gestalt for what the leaves of these seedlings and stems look like. But I think, again, most of the time, at least that's how it works for me, I think generally, is I recognize a seedling because I recognize it as beginning to look like, again, the adult plant that it's destined to be. So in this one right here, prairie phlox. And another thing that's important, I think, that in separating them is how they emerge. So you can put these orb seedlings into two basic groups. And this is what Dave Williams does in the Tallgrass Prairie Center Guide. Either they emerge as a single stem with calling leaves. Calling leaves means leaves up on the stem. Or they emerge as a cluster of basal leaves without a stem. At least at the time that they emerge, they don't have a stem. And so you can put prairie seedlings into those two broad groups, and that really helps, again, in terms of starting to separate them and figure out what you got. This one, of course, emerges as a single round stem, and the stem is fairly round here. The yellow triangle here is making note that the leaves are opposite. These leaves that we're seeing here are opposite, and they are without a petiole. There's no leaf stem there, so sessile leaves is the term we use for that. The blue little arrow here is making note of the fact that there's a pretty prominent mid-vein that's recognizable here. But, a lot of leaves are going to have that. So it's not necessarily that useful. The leaves are fairly narrow and lancelet shaped. Well, that's on the adults over here. But on the seedlings here, they're fairly narrow and somewhat oblong to lance shaped. And there's some pubescence. There's enough pubescence even on the seedlings here that you can see the pubescence without a hand lens. Next one is wild bergamot. And this is one I think that you can pretty easily identify as a seedling. It really does look a lot like the adult plant. The seedling becomes very similar to the adult plant very quickly. Here again, we can see this is the picture I took. So the ones that I took are going to have sort of a light greenish background. This is the one again from the book that Larry Guild provided pictures for. And then this is from the Tallgrass Prairie Center. So again, we can see that, yeah, these seedlings look gestalt-wise, they look a lot like what they are. So in some cases, it is pretty easy to identify seedlings pretty early on when they take on that adult morphology fairly quickly. And the things that, again, are pointed out here are, of course, the square stem. These seedlings have a square stem right from the get-go, pretty much. Again, opposite leaves. These have petioles, though, of course, a leaf stem. And you can even get a whiff of Monarda scent from these leaves pretty early on as well. The yellow arrow is just making point of the fairly coarse teeth or serrations that are on the margins of the leaf blades there. So I think this is a pretty, I would say, easy seedling to identify. Another mint here. This one is Virginia mountain mint. And so we have the same characteristics again. You're going to see that square stem. You're going to see the opposite leaves. You're going to have that minty smell. Now, of course, Pycnanthemum mountain mints smell different than what Monarda does. So I think of it as a pink Pycnanthemum scent, not a mint scent. You probably can, I think, identify the three types of Pycnanthemum. This one here is Virginiatum, which is what this one is right here. And I think that's what this is here too, although the label for this picture image just said mountain mint. So it wasn't clear which species of mountain mint, but it looks like Virginia mountain mint to me. This one here is narrowleaf mountain mint. So again, narrowleaf in the seedling version, narrowleaf and Virginia are going to be pretty similar. But I think there might be a good chance. I'm looking at this stem right here, and I can see little hairs along the corner of the stem. That's what you see over here very well. You see how the hair is all lined up just on the corners of the stem. That's what distinguishes Virginia mountain mint from narrowleaf mountain mint. Narrowleaf mountain mint doesn't have any hairs on any part of the stem. And Virginia mountain mint has hairs just on the corners, and then hairy mountain mint, the third species of pycnanthemum, has hair on all parts of the stem, on the faces and as well on the corners. And Virginia mountain mint has, I think of the three, has the most delightful scent. But again, for Virginia mountain mint, I think that would be pretty easy one, I think, to distinguish, with that square stem and the leaves and then that minty smell. All right, here's butterfly milkweed. This is one that a lot of people like to plant, of course. And so here again is the picture from the DOT guide, and here's the Tallgrass Prairie Center one, and then here's a mature plant. So the things that are pointed out here, it merges as a single stem like the mountain mints. It has colline leaves. The stem is fairly round to separate it, of course, from the mints. Can't confuse it there. It has a fair amount of pubescence on the stem as well, even as a seedling here. We can see a lot of pubescence down and through here. The leaves start out, the first leaves start out as opposite, which is the leaf arrangement for lots of milkweeds. But the adult butterfly milkweeds do not have opposite leaves. They are alternate to sub-opposite in some places. They kind of just come off here and there randomly along the stem. And you'll start seeing that on these seedlings as they get a little bit bigger. But the first ones, as we can see here, are opposite. And the leaves are fairly elliptic shaped, somewhat oblong. And now this one doesn't have any white latex, even as the adult plant. So you wouldn't see that. But you would see some latex, of course, with this one, which is the next milkweed, which is swamp milkweed. It will have opposite leaves consistently from the get-go, and then as it gets larger, it maintains those opposite leaves. Its leaves, of course, are much, you can see in the adult plant here, are going to become much longer, much more lanceolate, and you can kind of see that in the seedling here. And it will have some milk too. Not probably right away as a young seedling, but at some point, as the seedling gets a little bit bigger, it will. The leaves, the leaf margins are just, and this is true for butterfly milkweed too. These leaf margins on these young seedlings here are minutely ciliate. I wouldn't certainly call that tooth, but you can see that very well here that there's tiny little cilia, little hairs lining the edge of those leaves there. The stem is going to be much more glabrescent. Glabrescent means pretty much entirely glabrous, except there can be just a few sparse hairs. So glabrescent means almost glabrous, but not quite. So it's going to have a lot less hairs, of course, than what the seedling of butterfly milkweed does over here. Next one is a good one to plant, and it does well in restorations and reconstructions. It takes a while for it to come up from seed, though, but this is lead plant, of course. And here's a picture I took of a young plant. Here's pictures from the book. So the first leaves, the first true leaves, not the colleens, but the first true leaves on lead plant are going to be simple leaves. They're not compound. They're just simple leaves that are almost entirely circular in shape. Another thing with the legumes that we can check on always and can help separate species somewhat are the stipules. So the blue arrows down here are pointing to the stipules on a lead plant here, which would be described as very slender or hair-like. They're just like little threads or little hairs. And the stipules, again, are always in pairs, and they occur at the base of the leaf, towards the base of the leaf. So it'll start out with these, you can see on this one over here, it starts out with all these simple leaves, almost perfectly round. Dave points out that these first leaves will have a little, what's called a mucronate point. So just a tiny little pointed, it's not a tooth or anything like that, but just a tiny little point. Basically, it could be just the tip of this mid vein extending past the margin of the leaf just a little bit. It'll have those. But then as you see here, now these leaves up here, it doesn't take too long, and now it's starting to form some compound leaves. This leaf here is a compound leaf with 5 leaflets. And there's another compound leaf forming right there. So this is, of course, what it looks like when it gets big, which is to have compound leaves with lots and lots of leaflets. So this is a good example, one that it starts out as a seedling. It doesn't look very much like what it's going to be because of these simple leaves. Next one is, there's 2 of them here, showy tick trefoil on the left and round-headed bush clover on the right. And so both of these are legumes again. Both of these have stipules. And again, we're dealing with stipules for both of these. Right here, these yellow arrows are pointing to them, that are very slender and hair-like. And Desmodium canadense, or showy tick trefoil, when it's first coming up, is going to look a lot like lead plant. It's going to have, the first leaves are going to be simple and circular. And to be honest, I don't know if there's any way to really tell those apart at this stage. A little bit later, the next leaves will become trifoliate. So the term trifoliate means a compound leaf, like these right here. These are the leaves on the adult plants. These are compound leaves. Each of these is a single leaf, of course, with 3 leaflets. So trifoliate means a compound leaf with 3 leaflets. The stipules are similar to lead plant too. There's a fair amount of hair on Desmodium canadense here, and there may not be quite so much on lead plant here, it looks like. There's a little bit, but maybe not quite so much. Eventually, though, you'll see these 5 or more compound leaves on lead plant. The other one here, round-headed bush clover, starts with 3 leaflets on its leaves, trifoliate leaves. Its first leaves are trifoliate, and it continues to have trifoliate leaves as it makes more and more leaves. Its stipules, again, are similar, as I said, slender, real slender, kind of hair-like. And Dave points out that on these leaflets, there is another little mucronate point on these seedlings. The leaves I always think the leaves on round-headed bush clover are pretty dense. There's a lot of leaves packed in there along the stem. Next one, we're going to look at the clovers, purple and white prairie clover. So purple over here. All of these pictures right here, they're all touching each other. These are all purple prairie clover, and then white prairie clover is this one up here. So when they start out, they're going to be pretty similar. Both of them emerge as a single stem with calling leaves. The stem's round. The stems are mostly glabrous. The stipules are pretty similar. The yellow ones, again, pointing to the stipules. And they're fairly slender too. Maybe not quite as slender as the ones we've been seeing, but fairly. The biggest differences here are going to be in the number of leaflets and the size of the leaflets. You can tell purple prairie clover, even as a seedling here, somewhat, because it'll have Some of its leaves will be 3 leaflets and some will be 5. And its leaflets are more narrow, relatively speaking, than white. This again is an adult leaf. These are adult leaves right here for purple prairie clover. And then on the adult leaves, you can see there's a big difference in the width of the leaflets between white and purple. So you can start seeing that even as a seedling. Here again is a seedling of purple, and here's a seedling for white. You can see how much broader these are here. And in white prairie clover, their leaflets are almost always just 3 leaflets at this stage. It will develop up to 9 leaflets at some point. But again, we're talking about the seedling stage, of course, trying to identify it when it's in this stage. And these always have 3 at that stage. And the leaflets down here, the blue arrow here is pointing out that on these seedlings here, the leaflets, and this one has 5. The leaflets have a little point on them, tiny little point. It seems to sort of disappear in the older leaves and leaflets. But on the seedlings again, and compare this seedling with this seedling over here, the leaflet is notched at the tip rather than having a little point. All right, let's see. Next is the baptisias. So we've got both baptisias here, bracteata, cream wild indigo on the left. These pictures in through here. And then white wild indigo over here. And I had one that I was growing, and so here's a picture I took of one again. So these are pretty similar again, both of them baptisias, of course, so you might expect them to be similar. They're similar in the fact that the stipules are more leaf-like now. Here's the stipules on bracteata. Here's the stipules over here on lactea, white. So these stipules are more leaf-like. They're not nearly as slender. They're more like little leaves. The leaflets on both, and this is again going to be helpful in separating them from some other legumes that we just looked at, but the leaflets are obovate. So obovate means that the leaflet gets broader out towards the tip, and it's more narrow down towards the base of the leaflet. That's what we're seeing here, and that's what we see over here as well. So those very broad obovate leaflets are again, common thing for both of them in the leaflet or in the seedling stage. And they stay somewhat like that too, as this is a leaflet for an adult plant. Of course, this is a leaflet for an adult plant. These are still somewhat obovate for white, but for the cream here, they've become a little bit more elliptic. These are the more adult leaves. And so those are some good characteristics to again, pinpoint this baptisia. And then the separation of them is pretty simple. Bracteata is going to have a lot more pubescence on it. Pubescence on the stem, pubescence on the leaves. We can see that again on the seedlings here, and we can see it into the adult plant too right here. Whereas over here on lactea, there's really no pubescence at all. And supposedly, again, the leaflets on lactea have a little notch at the tip, which we don't see that. We don't see it on this example, at least. I don't see that notch on these here very well, so I'm not sure. Looks like maybe that one might have a little bit of a notch, but so it might not be real consistent. Next two we have on the next slide are wild quinine, and compass plant. So I think these two are, again, a couple that you can sort of get by gestalt to some extent. Parthenium or wild quinine. So here's another one that's different now. So here now we have, these again were coming up as stems. These two come up as a rosette. So again, a cluster of basal leaves. We don't see a stem right here. It's just this cluster of basal leaves. And same thing with compass plant. We just got one leaf here, but there's no stem per se. This is all leaf coming from the base of the plant right here. These are the collenes here. So that cluster of basal leaves rather than a stem, and again, is the other group I was talking about. So that's characteristic for both of these. This is what the adult leaves on Parthenium look like, the colline leaves that are coming off of the stem, because it will develop a stem, of course. And so again, this is a situation where the seedling, I think to some extent, starts out looking pretty similar to the adult mature leaves, fairly quickly. These leaves here bear pretty strong resemblance to these leaves here. With compass plant, of course, that's not the case at all. Compass plant to basal leaves are these very long oblanceolate leaves. So this is oblanceolate. It's a lanceolate leaf, but again, it's widest out towards the tip of the leaf and more narrow towards the base of the leaf. So this oblanceolate leaf, very long, and with a very strong midvein, And also, both of these are going to have a very scabrous feel to the leaves. Scabrous means that the pubescence is composed of short, stiff hairs. And so it kind of feels like sandpaper. Scabrous means when you rub your fingers over the blade of the leaf, those short, stiff hairs feel very rough. Now, eventually, of course, the compass plant will produce leaves that we're familiar with, like this, the basal leaves. When the plant gets bigger, there'll be some much later basal leaves that are very, very much lobed, like these leaves that are coming off of the stem. But it'll look like this for quite a while. So you just have to kind of get the gestalt for this oblanceolate, very rough leaf. All right, this one is pretty easy one. This is prairie cinquefoil. This one was not included in the tallgrass prairie version. Oops, gotta get rid of that. So we don't have a picture from them. So this is a picture I took in the greenhouse, and it looks pretty similar to the one that was in the field guide from the DOT as well. Here we see that, again, this emerges as a rosette or cluster of basal leaves. The first leaves, these first leaves here are simple leaves. As we can see here, that's a simple leaf, that's a simple leaf, these are simple leaves. They have the very first ones, like this one down here, are somewhat, I guess if you were looking at sort of the overall shape, sort of round, circular in shape, they have a few very large teeth out on the tip of the leaf. And then the next few that start coming up, they'll have these large teeth that go all the way around. This one here just has three large teeth down here. It doesn't have them going all the way around. As they get older, you can see these here too. These have teeth that go all the way around. And then eventually, of course, the later yet leaves, like this one right here that's emerging, is going to be pinnately compound. Because now this is what they look like when they're an adult plant. Pinnately compound leaves with, well, this one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 leaflets. So this is again one that looks a little bit different at the very beginning, but again, as time passes, and you'll start seeing some of these later leaves that will help you think of what it is, hopefully. Next one, we're going to look at purple meadow rue and prairie larkspur. I have to say, I'm not 100% sure that this is correct for prairie larkspur. I was looking at, this was labeled prairie larkspur, and the pictures I got from Bill Johnson, again, from the ones that were raised in the prison, but I'm not sure that is correct. So I couldn't verify this. I couldn't find any pictures anywhere else online that showed what the seedlings of prairie larkspur looks like. I mean, this is what the adult leaves look like. And it's certainly possible that, again, later basal leaves will start looking more like this. Could be, but I'm not 100% sure. This one, again, prairie larkspur is going to have the leaves again merge as a cluster of basal leaves. Purple meadow rue emerges as a stem. Well, it actually emerges first here with a compound leaf, but then it will quickly form a stem. And these are some examples, of course, what the leaves look like. This is a leaf that comes off the stem of an older plant. This is a basal leaf that comes off near the base of the plant. And what you can see here is that even this very first basal leaf that's coming up, these leaflets have 3 lobes out on their outer margin. On the apex of the leaflets here, there's 3 lobes. And that's exactly what happens with the larger leaves. The lobes are a little bit bigger here. The 3 lobes are larger and more distinct, but you'll see that 3-lobed margin and pattern very quickly in the seedlings here on purple meadow root. And it looks like there might be sort of a purplish rachis to that compound leaf too, right in through here. Next one are a couple of anemones, the thimbleweed, Anemone cylindrica on the left here, and then Anemone canadensis on the right, these 3 over here. So both of these are again going to emerge as a rosette, a cluster of basal leaves, and the first leaves are going to be simple. In both cases, these first leaves coming up here are simple leaves. The first leaves are also somewhat 3-lobed, but 3 larger lobes. It kind of, I suppose you might describe them as sort of maple-like. That's the term that Dave Williams used. Sort of maple-like in the fact that, again, there's sort of like 3 major lobes on these simple leaves here. But what happens eventually in Anemone cylindrica, with the later leaves, is that this is almost basically a compound leaf now, because the sinus here and the lobing, this sinus comes all the way down and cuts this blade into, I would say it's very close, if not completely cut, but very closely cutting these into leaflets, so that these are no longer lobes. Up here, they're just lobes. And actually, if you're looking at this stage in thimbleweed and this stage in Canada anemone, you really can't tell them apart because they look very much the same at this stage. Now, at an older stage, Anemone canadensis retains the same, just partially lobed leaves. That's what these yellow triangles are supposed to be pointing to here, and then these over here. This leaf and this leaf are now much different, and that's how you can tell cylindrica eventually apart from canadensis, is when you see some little bit later leaves. Again, you can't do it with the first leaves, but a little bit later leaves, there'll be this difference here again, where this is basically a compound leaf now, a trifoliate leaf with 3 leaflets. And this one is still a simple leaf. It's just got some lobes. This, of course, is what they look like eventually, which is even much, much more lobed than what we see in these first leaves. Next one is a pretty easy one. I think prairie violet to recognize as a seedling, because again, it looks a lot like a violet does when it grows up. Here's again a seedling picture I took in the greenhouse, and here's one from the Tallgrass Prairie book. And what we see here again is leaves that are emerging as a rosette or a cluster of basal leaves. That's going to be true. This plant never does produce a stem. It maintains those basal leaves all the way through its life. And the first leaves here are somewhat deltoid or triangular in shape. You can get kind of a triangular look again, and they have that violet look. If you know what violet leaves look like, they have that violet look, somewhat triangular. This one, the very first leaves do not have much going along on the margins. The margin here is just barely got any teeth in it. It's almost entire. But then the next leaves and the next leaves will have more and more lobing in them. Here's a older plant that has still has some of its first leaves, or the early summer leaves, which are much more lobed than what even these leaves are, but they're not cut like this one. This is the late summer leaf here. So these leaves on violets, as the seedling grows, they'll progressively get more and more lobing in them, larger teeth, if you want to call these teeth or call them a lobe. Again, at some point, a tooth becomes a lobe as it gets bigger. Some of the teeth will have slender points on them, as we can see down here. We can see up here on this one here. And they just have that violet gestalt look to them. So at least Viola pedotifida, the prairie violet, you can recognize this way. The burstfoot violet pedata don't have any seedling pictures of it. I would suspect that it might get more lobed more quickly, but I don't know for sure on that one. All right, now we've got a monocot, we've got Ohio spiderwort or prairie spiderwort, the name it goes by. The spiderwort would be pretty easy, I think, to recognize as they're coming up as seedlings. You know, they're going to have that they emerge sort of looking like a grass, a single grass-like stem, since they are a monocot, but they're going to be easy to separate from a grass because of all this purplish coloration that you see on the stems even, and on the bases of the leaves. You can see it on this one. I took a picture of one in the greenhouse again here. You can see it on this one here. So there's these purplish veins on the base of the leaf. You can see it on this one as well here. So, and the fact that, again, you see grass-like leaves, they're going to have a sheath. This is what they look like when they get bigger, of course, over here, these three. Now, you cannot tell Tradescantia ohioensis apart from Bracteata, not at this stage. The Bracteata, which is the other really common Tradescantia that we have in prairies, and ohioensis in the seedling stage are going to look almost exactly alike. You're going to have to wait for flowers so you can see what the sepals look like. Golden Alexander is the next one. It's another one that looks very, very different as a seedling than what it's going to look like as an adult plant, especially with the leaves. Again, it's going to emerge as a rosette. Here's a rosette of a couple of basal leaves with simple basal leaves. Here's another one up here. These first leaves, again, they're simple. They have a blade that's somewhat circular, or maybe somewhat what's called reniform. Reniform means sort of kidney shaped, which means like sort of like a half circle, half hemisphere kind of shape with a little bit of an indentation where the blade attaches to the top of the petiole. They have what's usually described as dentate margins. So dentate means that there's teeth, but the teeth are pointing straight out. So there's a slight difference in what serrate and dentate mean. Serrate, which is, I've used that term on some of the other leaf margins. Serrate means toothed, but the teeth are pointing towards the tip of the leaf. They're slanting and pointed more towards the tip of the leaf. That's what serrate means. If we see teeth that are pointing more straight out, that's more saw-like. Then the teeth are more like a saw because the teeth are pointing straight out, sort of perpendicular. That's the term dentate. So that's what we're seeing here, and that's what the yellow arrows are supposed to be pointing to here. This is, again, the early leaves are simple, but then the little bit later leaves that are coming up in this basal rosette are going to be trifoliate. Here at the bottom here, we see the 3 leaflets. That's what the blue arrows are pointing to. 3 leaflets now on a compound leaf. And of course, they'll get even more compound, even twice compound is what they're going to be eventually over here when they grow up. Next two are together here. These I think will be pretty simple, sort of gestalt wise. So, and neither of these were in the Tallgrass Prairie Center's seedling guide. So these are coming from this seedling right here, and this seedling right here are coming from the DOT guide. But both of them, again, I think are good examples of seedling leaves that fairly quickly start to look like or resemble the more mature leaves. So on prairie and plantain, we have, again, both of these are going to be leaves or seedlings that emerge as a rosette with a cluster of basal leaves. And in the prairie and plantain, of course, here's some examples of some older basal leaves. But even in the seedling, we see a very long petiole, and then this very broadly elliptic blade. And of course, with veination, like in the adult leaves, the veination is more or less parallel, and you can see quite a few veins, which is different, of course, from most of the dicots have net veination, but this is somewhat parallel veination, and we can sort of see that parallel veination here. The seedlings can have anywhere from 3 to 5 very distinct veins, 3 to 5. This one has 3 right here. You can see really easily. But again, you see that pattern where the lateral veins are somewhat parallel with the central vein. They come away from the central vein here, but then they come back towards the central vein down here towards the tip. And here's just another clump of the adult leaves. Oh, by the way, I put the source of the pictures in here, in amongst all these pictures. So Minnesota wildflowers and Missouri plants are the 2 main sources of all these pictures of the more mature adult leaves. Same thing with alum root. I think basically here's alum root when it grows up, and here's alum root as a seedling. I think here again the seedling leaves are very similar looking. They look very similar to what they're going to be looking like later on. Here we have, again, a cluster of basal leaves. Again, leaves are simple here. Both of these stay simple. The basal leaves stay simple. They don't become compound at any point in time. They stay that way. But like the adult leaves up here, these seedling leaves here are already showing the signs of being palmately lobed. The leaves of heuchera are palmately lobed and palmately veined, which means, again, that you can see it best, of course, maybe in this one up here, but you have at least 3 main veins that are coming from a common point right at the base of the leaf. And we can see that forming right here as well. 3 main veins coming from the base of the leaf blade right there. So I think, again, these look pretty similar to those adult leaves. Next one is one that's pretty easy to identify too as a seedling, and a real important species, of course, on our prairies, Echinacea pallida, the pale purple coneflower. And this one again is same way, it emerges as a rosette of basal leaves. Here we can see just one in this one I photographed, but here there's 2 basal leaves coming up in this plant. And the thing that sticks out here, I think, largely are the 3 very distinct veins. You've got a very strong mid vein, and you got 2 strong lateral veins as well that show up fairly strongly. That's what the yellow arrows are pointing to here towards the base of the leaf here. And you can still see those 3 main veins in the adult leaves over here, of course. The other thing, of course, here is that the leaves are very scabrous. So again, you feel these leaves and they're going to feel like sandpaper. Next one is a couple of asters, New England aster and then smooth blue aster. New England aster here, I think, again, is a good example of a leaf that takes on the adult characteristics pretty quickly in these seedlings. We have, again, in this case, it's a stem, not a rosette, but the plant emerges as a stem with colline leaves on the stem. But like in the adult plants over here, the bases of the leaves are auriculate and clasping. They have even these little seedling leaves here, they have the bases of the leaves are extended down past the stem here, wrapping around the stem and clasping that stem. You can see it on these as well. So again, very quickly, the New England aster leaves are looking, at least the base of the leaves are looking very similar to what they're going to be as an adult. The shape of the leaves is a little bit different here. These are spatulate. So the seedling leaves here are spatulate. That means spoon shaped. They look kind of like a spoon with the, the spoon end out here and the handle down here, but they become a little bit more oblong on the adult plant. And for smooth blue aster, again, this one emerges as a cluster of rosette leaves, a cluster of basal leaves. The yellow arrows that Dave put in here are supposed to point to these basal leaves having a somewhat of a winged petiole. And you can kind of see it on this large cluster of basal leaves here. This is a bit older, of course. This could actually be a plant that's several years old and just coming back from growth in the spring. But on this cluster of basal leaves and this leaf here, then the petiole has this margin of wing kind of attached to it, which makes the petiole seem broader. And these are going to be very smooth. There's really no hairs on the blade of this leaf at all. There are tiny ciliate hairs on the margin, but that's described as the margin being ciliate then. The surface of the blade here on both the top and bottom is glabrous. There's no hairs whatsoever. And there's going to be a lot more hairs over here on New England aster. It has lots of hairs on the stem. Couple more, and we'll be just about done here. We're going to finish up with some grasses in just a little bit here. Here's rigid goldenrod and fall sunflower oxeye. I think the thing that is useful for goldenrod, rigid goldenrod, it's going to be again a basal rosette clump of leaves that are coming up. It doesn't have a stem right away. It will produce a stem, of course, when it's going to flower. But again, we're talking about the seedling stage here. The basal leaves can have very long petioles. They're going to have a very rough feel to them. Again, very scabrous feel to them. What I've noticed, even on the adult leaves over here, is when you look at the teeth on the leaves of any rigid goldenrod, no matter what stage, I think of this as being more a result of two notches rather than being a tooth. Because if you kind of look at the margin of this leaf would just sort of be continuous along there. It's not like over here where you actually have a tooth that projects out away from the margin of the blade. This is, again, this type of serration. I mean, we would call this serrated, but it's not serrated in the same way so much, again, because of the it's a result. This tooth right here and this tooth right here, to me, are more a result of this notch than they are an extension of the leaf tissue into a tooth. And so that sort of peculiar type of toothing, teeth that we see along the margin, and in some cases, the teeth look a little bit more crenulate than tooth, which is more of a scallop look to it. Over here in oxeye, this is another great example, I think, of a seedling that very quickly looks like the adult plant. The adult plant, the leaves here we see on these seedlings here look very similar to the adult leaf we see up here. Opposite leaves. The stems on oxeye are not perfectly round. They have, I wouldn't call them square, but there's an angle on them. So there's some ridges. That's what the blue arrows are pointing to down here. The fact that the stem's not perfectly round, it's got some angles on them. You can feel if you use your fingers and thumb and kind of feel that stem. But opposite leaves with petioles and very conspicuous teeth. These would be serrations, serrate leaf with the teeth pointing towards the tip of the leaf. So again, baby plants look pretty similar to the adult plants. These two are really common in plantings, of course, black-eyed Susan and gray-headed coneflower. And here again are what seedlings look like. Black-eyed Susan this is really young. This is when I photographed in the greenhouse, and you can just see all the pubescence that comes off of these leaves. Same thing down here. So very, very pubescent leaves. Both of these again are going to be coming up as a rosette. a cluster of basal leaves. They'll form a stem later as they get mature and begin to flower. So I think the hairiness of this one is pretty good. The shape of these leaves here, somewhat spatulate, somewhat spoon-shaped here, might be another good characteristic, although these are a little bit more elliptic here, down here. So we can see that they do change shape as they get a little bit later. For gray-headed coneflower, this is a good picture again. This is a seedling that you would see typically if maybe a few weeks after they come up. Basal leaves here, 3 basal leaves. The first basal leaves don't have as much teeth on them, as much toothing on them. The third and larger basal leaf has much more teeth on it. That's one pattern. You see pubescence on the leaves over here as well. I mean, again, hopefully what you're able to do with these guides, of course, is you take your guide out to your prairie planting and you bring some seedlings in, whatever you want to do. But the way to identify seedlings, basically, there are no keys. There are no keys. The way to identify seedlings is either you know them by gestalt or you compare your plant to these pictures. That's going to be the way that you figure them out. All right, the last 2 slides here, I think we're going to look at some grasses. Oh, whoops, not yet. This one here is Blazing Star and Rattlesnake Master. And Rattlesnake Master is as easy as it gets because, again, right away, the seedlings on Rattlesnake Master are producing these leaves that look very similar to the adult plant. You've got the little prickles, we might call these, or tough ciliate hairs coming off the margin right away on these young leaves here. So really no problem identifying it. For Blazing Star, the seedling again is going to come up as a rosette of basal leaves at first. One main vein is what is being pointed out here with these yellow arrows, and then 2 much lighter lateral veins. But again, a leaf that looks like a grass leaf. Now, obviously, there's going to be some other blazing stars that you would probably, have to, you might struggle with or confuse. We're not separating these from other blazing stars. So again, this is where taking this guide out to the field with you and looking at these pictures and looking at the plant side by side is probably a good strategy. The older plants, of course, develop a lot more leaves up on the stem, but there's always going to be those very narrow leaves, long narrow leaves. Now we have some grasses. So the first 3 here are big blue stem, Indian grass, and wild Canada wild rye, I should say. And all of these are all very, I think, easy to identify once you know what to look for. With big blue stem, it's looking for a ligule here that's a fairly noticeable and conspicuous membrane, but it's very flexible. It's often going to be somewhat, it might sort of be bent over to some extent. It's, not nearly as rigid as this membranous ligule over here on Indian grass. This is how you separate these 2 species at any point in their vegetative growth until you start seeing inflorescences. This is the best thing to look for. And this is something that shows up in the seedlings fairly soon. As soon as you have a few of the few leaves, this size right here. So a lot of hairs. The hairs aren't always going to be very helpful though, because hairs can come and go on these plants. The amount of pubescence and hairiness on both big blue stem and Indian grass is a matter of acclimation. So it's a matter of what the environment's like for that plant. It's the ligule that's more important. So a membrane here that's not nearly as tall and more straight across the top, and ligule here that's very tall and more pointed towards the top. Some people describe this as a gun sight. Over here on Canada wild rye, it's the auricles. these auricles that come around off the base of the leaf blade here, and an auricle there, an auricle there. Again, auricles always come in pairs that are very slender and wrap around the actual stem of the grass plant here. This will certainly tell you that it's likely a wild rye. Other wild ryes will have these too, of course. Canada wild rye has a more significant, broader blade to it than the other wild ryes. And I think it might be true to some extent that Canada has this, the base of the leaf blade here. This is called the collar area. The collar area here is just this very whitish light green coloration here. And the last two are little blue stem and side oats grama, are two mid grasses. So here again are the seedlings. This is little blue stem over here, and this is side oats grama over here. Again, you're looking at the ligules. You're looking at for side oats grama, you're actually looking at the leaf blade and the ligule. The ligule on the seedling is similar to the ligule on this larger plant right here. It's a fringe of hairs, just a tiny little fringe of hairs, a row of hairs. But what's really helpful, because there's other plants that have ligules that look like that, what's really helpful on side oats grama is these hairs that come off the margin of the lower part of the leaf blade. Here again is the adult plant, and you can see those hairs coming off right there. This is a seedling here, and it's showing the same thing. These hairs that come off the margin, and especially important are the base of these hairs, have a little tiny swollen gland. So that's a very good mark to identify side oats grama vegetatively anytime, whether it's a seedling or a larger plant. Again, you're not sure what it might be. For little blue stem, the ligule here is a membrane, and this looks like it's fairly conspicuous here. Here's another one on an adult plant, pretty conspicuous. Again, hairs can be quite variable. What I find most important for little blue stem is something that you can't see very well here, but you can see it right up here. I can point to where you'd look. You look at this last leaf that's coming out of the shoot. This is the most recent leaf to form, this little leaf right here. And you take a look at that leaf, and if that leaf is folded completely over, it's called folded in the bud, because this is the leaf that's still sort of in the bud stage. If the leaf is folded completely, like a piece of paper folded over and pressed down, completely folded over in half with almost the two edges of the leaf as they fold over like this, they meet, strongly folded over. That's a good characteristic for little blue stem. Most other, the big blue stem and Indian grass and side oats, I mean, if you're looking at something in this stage, they have that last leaf that's coming out. It's called rolled in the bud. You look at that and you'll see that the leaf is actually rolled over, and the edges of the blade overlap a little bit, but the leaf blade is actually circular. It's rolled. It's not folded flat. That's a really good characteristic to distinguish little blue stem at any stage, the seedling stage, or again, something a little bit larger, but not yet flowering. All right, that is it for seedling ID for tonight. Any questions?
Okay, none in the chat. So anybody can type in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself now and ask a question.
Seedlings, I think, again, are just, you have to use something to help you compare pictures, because some of those seedlings, again, are going to look a little bit different than what you might expect them to look like, based on what you know the adult plant to look like. But that's what these guys are for.
I have a question.
Sure.
We had a a big patch of pampas grass that had been planted by the previous people who lived at our place. And I
Mhm.
dug that stuff out, and it was really difficult because that stuff just
I
forms
bet.
this mat. I thought I had gotten rid of it and planted it in big blue stem, mostly.
Okay.
And the big blue stem is still by far the majority, but I'm noticing that the pampas grass is coming back around the edges. I don't know enough about the two species to be able to identify which is which until they're actually in the blossoming stage.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So you probably just, you dug out the pampas grass pretty much, you said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's coming back.
Obviously you did a good job because you got most of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, if you missed a little bit of a rhizome got cut off or something and the rhizome didn't get out, that rhizome can probably tough enough to persist and is a source of some more shoots that you're seeing. So I'm sure there will be a good way for you to separate pampas grass from big blue stem by looking at ligulls and other sheath characteristics. I'll have to check on that because pampas grass is not a grass that I look at a whole lot very closely.
Mhm.
And most of the time you don't have any problem identifying it, of course, because it's big and you can tell what it is without looking at it closely. But
Can
your
you-
situation is one that you'll have to look at it more closely. So what I can do is take a look at that and see if I can come up with something to help you there. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head what that would be right now.
Okay.
It might be. I mean, I don't know for sure. It might be so simple as one has a membranous ligule and one has a fringe of hairs. I don't know for sure. Pampas grass is in the same tribe, which is a subtaxonomic group within the family as big blue stem. So it may have the same ligule type. It may have a membrane.
So will you be able to send, if you find anything, or you'll be able to
Yeah.
send it out to me?
Yeah, sure. What I can do is I can send it to Lance, I guess, and he can get it to you, or you can just send me an email reminding me, or telling me here's my my email is thomas.rosburg@drake.edu. So it's you can send me something and I'll be able to send it back.
It's Thomas.Rosburg.
Yep, my name Thomas
Uh,
Rosburg @drake.edu.
at drake.edu. Okay, I'll send you a reminder of that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. You're welcome, Jonathan.
Kathy asked if there's a guide for weed seedlings.
There are some guides for weed seedlings, and so again, this one does have some weeds in it, but then there's I think there's something I've seen out of Nebraska that has a lot of weeds. Weed ID basically. So I think it's weed ID in general. So it looks at larger versions of those weeds, but I think it seems like I thought I saw seedlings included too, but I can't remember for sure.
Yeah, Weeds of Nebraska. I did get that. It's doesn't have all the seedlings, but
Oh, does it have some seedlings though?
it's a big book. I haven't looked through it that
No.
closely
Okay.
yet.
Yeah, I remember. I don't think I even have it on my shelf, but I think I saw it somewhere, and I thought that I saw seedlings in it. Maybe.
Yeah, I did, and I have that other book you were talking about, so I just didn't know if you knew of any others.
Well, so
Thanks.
seedlings, so that's a good point. I mean, a lot of times you just want to figure out whether you've got weeds or you got prairie stuff, right? So
Right.
I mean, if you have a guide like this, at least, and you're out there and you see something and it just doesn't match up with anything, in the guide, it's probably a weed then.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably. But
In particular, foxtail.
oh, foxtails, yes. Those grass seedlings, yeah, they're going to be hard.
Yeah.
It's going to be very hard to, and you might think, well, you could pull them out, but pulling a seedling out, it's not going to really tell you as much either, because the perennial seedlings don't have their perennial roots really developed yet. So yeah, later on, you can do that test. You can, if you're trying to decide whether it's a perennial or not,
Right.
see how well it pulls out of the ground. But seedlings are going to be easily pulled out of the ground either way. So it's going to be hard to nail down those weedy grass seedlings.
Yeah. Just the foxtail, it's a warm season grass, so
It's a warm season grass, right? It's warm season, so it would be coming on the same time as the native warm seasons in a sense. I don't know if there are some, there's a one characteristic with foxtails. I don't know how soon it is visible on a seedling, but what I would look for, and this is true for at least 2 of the 3 species of foxtail, giant foxtail and green foxtail. I would look at, I'd pull up the seedling and then look at the sheath. You know what the sheath is? The sheath is the bottom part of the leaf, the leaf blade and the sheath meet, right where that ligule is. And so the sheath is the part of the leaf that wraps around the stem. So you're looking at that sheath, and in foxtail, the sheaths overlap, but one of the overlapping portion of that sheath is ciliate. So the margin of that sheath has lost the cilia, tiny little hairs that line the margin of that sheath, the edge of that sheath. And that's something that, it does occur in some other species besides foxtails, but that doesn't occur in big blue stem. Big blue stem's not that way. Indian grass is not that way. Little blue stem's not that way. So if you were trying to separate foxtail from the native grasses, that would work.
Okay.
At a seedling stage.
I might send you an email so you can send that to me.
Yeah, I bet there's some pictures out there. I'll see if I can find some pictures of seedling foxtails and see if they have that.
Okay.
The adult plants do, of course.
Yeah.
Just don't know for sure if the seedlings do.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Kathy.
Let's see.
Yeah, and it just goes without saying, if you have any questions, on anything, just let me know. Send in an email my way, and I still have to get back to Lance with how to separate Rumex from Persicaria, and I've been working on it, and I think there is a way to help you do that, and I'll try and get that done this weekend.
Sounds good. Looks like that's all the questions we got for now. Several people said thank you for doing these.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. And hey, check out the field trips for Iowa Native Plant Society and for I suppose Iowa Prairie Network will have some too. That's a good way to learn species. Follow someone around.
Yep.
All right.
Sounds
All right.
good. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Tom.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good field
See ya.
season.